Hey, what's up, Dan?
How's it going?
Good. We've talked about this for a while,
Yeah, yeah,
and we've known each other for a while.
yeah. I'm trying to think. It was getting close to 30 years, or
Oh man, I didn't want to put a number on it because some people that listen to this, they're not 30, and we've known each other for 30 years, man. I'm really excited for this conversation for many reasons. One, I think you are among one of the kindest, most intelligent, really thoughtful humans that I know, and we've known each other a long time. I think the work you're doing right now, which we will let everybody know what you're doing, which is some really, really impactful work. I think some of the most important work. But for folks that are just jumping in, this is Daniel Maigler. I know him as Dan. We met in college. We played on kind of like rival lacrosse teams. You were a defender. I was an attackman. We literally played against each other for years. It was just you and I. And then we reconnected years ago playing like kind of like men's league lacrosse. And as we reconnected, it became really clear that some people go through life, they don't find a passion. You have a passion. You are clear about your purpose. I'm going to try to introduce you and just jump in if I screw it up at any point, because there's a lot that you do. First and foremost, you are a social worker at a public school in the Chicagoland area. You are also a clinician and counselor therapist outside, like in private practice. You see
Mhm.
people, help people with mental health. You are a board member and is it the mental health chair
The mental
for
health advisor. Yeah.
mental health advisor for an amazing organization called Paws for Patrick. Again, we're going to get into all of this. You're a father, you're a lacrosse player, you're a community advocate, you're an awesome human. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Dan. By the way, formally, should I call you Daniel or Dan? What am I calling you right now?
I mean, everyone honestly just calls me Maigler because, as you know, because there's our generation. There's so many guys named Dan, and so
That's
it's just
right.
like, all right, yeah,
All right. Well, here's Megler, ladies and
yeah.
gentlemen. He does all the things I just told you about. Again, thank you for the work that you do. Thanks for being here. I know we've talked about this, and I'm excited to actually like record this episode. Maybe it's easiest just to tell people. I kind of told them the titles you have right now,
Mhm.
but just like as a snapshot, like what did you do this week work wise to give us an idea of like what you're doing in the world right now?
Yeah, so when you're a social worker at a public high school, it's fantastic because you go in every day with a game plan. But as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, and you got to just be ready. And you're no stranger to the education environment
Right.
of okay, I might have IEP meetings where I'm working with families and kids and teachers to try to make plans for kids, and then somebody's sobbing. And so you have to help get them to math class and figure out what's going on. I had to do a couple of assessments this week where students are suicidal and having to determine whether or not they're at a level of risk where they need to be sent to a hospital or if they can stay in school that day. So today I ran 3 different groups. I have a trauma survivors group. I
Mm-hmm.
have an individual issues group for kids who have anxiety, depression, OCD, anything like that. And then I have an LGBTQIA group. So we're running those. But then the group room we were using was needed for testing. So we had to
Oh,
all shuffle and wander down the hallways together and find a different place to do group. So every day is an adventure, really. It's pretty cool.
it's interesting. Like we say it, and we're like, I know I've been in this world where like you got to shuffle kids around, and like you have plans, and working with children. People ask me a lot, like, "Do you miss teaching?" Again, for folks listening to this that don't know, I was a public school teacher for years. I worked in public education, and I say I miss working with kids. I miss having that impact, but the impact that maybe a classroom teacher has is really different than the impact that you have in your role as a social worker. You talked about again just in it. It's a Friday. It's just a regular Friday for you, and
Mhm.
you are dealing with things like suicide prevention, mental health, anxiety. How did you get to a place? Again, I said earlier, I really think that your passion and your purpose are clear. I think you've got a really tight bullseye on where your value is and what you were made to do. Did you know this is what you wanted to do when you were younger? Like, how did you become who we see today in this podcast?
Yeah, when you and I first met, and I think the listeners and viewers need to know that when Mark and I first met, he had dreads and would be wearing sunglasses while he was playing lacrosse. So under the helmet, there was this guy, So I think just I want everyone to picture and envision that. But so when we met, I really thought I was going to go into politics, and I was
Okay.
planning on hopefully getting into the State Department or doing something. I always knew I wanted to impact the world and try to help people, and I thought I wanted to do that on a macro level. But as I started in college volunteering on campaigns and doing things like that, I found the political world to be pretty gross, to be honest.
Interesting.
And yeah, so I started working in the nonprofit space. And I thought, okay, well, I would like to go into lobbying perhaps and helping build the laws. And so I worked for an organization called the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. And I'm a senior in college and I needed a job. And I started calling up organizations to see if they needed anybody in lobbying. And I got to the C's and I got to a place called the Center for Violence Interruption. And they said,
Interesting.
well, no, we don't need a lobbyist, but we need a schools trainer. I said, okay, well, I don't have any job, and I know how to be poor. So
Yeah.
I went to this organization where we taught nonviolence, and we taught learning what the building blocks of violence were to kids who've been kicked out of regular CPS schools. So as a former Chicago Public Schools teacher, you know it takes a lot to get kicked out of a CPS school. And then in the summertime,
Indeed.
when school wasn't in session, we worked at the Cook County Jail, working with
Mm.
guys who are on house arrest about, again, looking at those building blocks of violence. And so I really loved that work, but I thought I might need more than $19,000 a year to pay my bills. And so people said, well, what should I do? So people said, well, you should get a master's in social work.
Okay.
And in that process, I've worked, in many places. I worked in group homes for abused and neglected kids. I worked at a Catholic school in the city. I've worked at a bunch of different high schools, therapeutic school. I've worked in adolescent psychiatric units. So to get to the place, and I've been at the school where I currently am for about 16 years. But
Wow.
yeah, so that was the progression. In my own family, I had a large everything in the DSM 4 or 5, I should say, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual was played out in my family life. So I have siblings with bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, aunts and uncles with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. So saw a lot of that firsthand. And so it gave me an interest in that area, but I didn't really know I was going into it until I kind of stumbled into it.
We always say people can be a victim or a product of their environment. Sounds like you're kind of both, right? Like you lived through this. It's just a quick side question, but it's 2024, right? And we're talking about like high school and growing up in the 80s, in the
Mhm.
90s. You know, were these things as known? Like, do we know that much more about mental health? Only because I literally just left a coffee chat with somebody. I met up for coffee, and we were talking about how when we were growing up, if you were angry, they were like, "Go bang your head against the wall."
Right.
Right. We don't have time to talk. Like feelings were not much of a thing, but it's like here we are only like 20 years later. I feel like we have so much science and understanding and tactics and techniques and of mental health. Did we have as much back then? Or like am I accurate in saying we know a lot more now and we've named it, we've known it? Like where are we at in the spectrum of knowing what we need to know about mental health?
I don't know if you've ever heard of the movie Ordinary People. It's funny. It's
Yes,
actually,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So in that time period, again, a lot of the same things, parents and having a disconnect from their kids, a lot of the same things that were causing issues are still present. But back then, people would be in the hospital for a month. Now they're in for 4 days.
Interesting.
I guess I'll ask you a bit of a trick question, but constellations, the stars in the sky, are those real?
No.
Well, I mean, yeah,
Well,
there's not really
there's not a
lines
right
connect.
answer, right? It's
Yeah,
like
right. It's a trick question, but there's not really lines connecting them in the sky. But can you use them to navigate?
100%.
Yeah. Mental health disorders are like constellations. They're not necessarily they're the best way we can understand and we connect different symptoms together to form a picture. And we call it bipolar. We call it schizophrenia. We call it anxiety. But it's no more real than those, the bear in the sky or the Big Dipper. And a different
Interesting.
culture would look at that differently and see a totally different picture. And one is not right and one is not wrong. It's all about how are we using it to navigate. And so schizophrenia was like bipolar disorder, something we all talk about all the time. That
Mhm.
didn't have its own separate diagnosis from schizophrenia until the 1980s. And
Interesting.
so we're going to, 10 years from now, we're going to be calling things something totally different. And we have a lot of medications that are less severe and damaging as far as people with side effects, but we are still just kind of throwing general things that were originally developed as beta blockers, as anti seizure medications. The vast majority of mental health medications that we use were not developed for mental health. They were developed for some other thing. And then they found out, for example, like ketamine, which they use was for anesthetic originally. And then they also said, wow, this has an anti anxiety and dissociative effect, which can really help people. But
Hmm.
so I like to imagine, I was telling a kid earlier today, hopefully when they are ready to retire, we'll have self-driving cars and hopefully we'll have medications that are actually tailored to the individual, to their body chemistry.
Mm.
So again, when you and I were growing up, we knew about 1% of what we needed to know, and now we know about maybe 10% of what we need to know. But the brain is still an incredible mystery. And every day we're just guess and check. We're using the guess and check method in how we treat mental health.
How do you, one, thank you for that PhD level understanding. I feel it, and I'm really glad. Like, I feel like it's validated what I thought, which was like, this has always been here. We didn't know the name, we didn't know how to define it, but now we can start to define it by putting together a bunch of different symptoms together and say, oh, when they present in this way, it is this, and these are therapies and or medications, things we could do to try to help somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I also heard you say is like part of it is that maybe that like the work that you do and in helping folks and guiding folks with mental health challenges, it's not like being a plumber. Meaning, if your toilet is clogged, you get the plunger and you plunge it and it's not clogged. You're kind of saying like, hey, there's a lot of different therapeutic approaches. There's a lot of different medical approaches. There's a lot of different things to do, and there is no diagnosis, do this thing, you get better, because there might not be better. So can you walk me through what is it like for you personally, not for the recipient and the patient? What's it like for you to try to, it's got to be hard to like watch kids struggle with these major things like suicide and true anxiety and bipolar. And you're like, I think this might help. Let's try this for a bit. Like, I would think that the immediacy of a solution would be so desirable, but I don't get the sense this is a sprint. It's a marathon and it might not ever end. How do you deal with that?
I think it's different in every case, but mostly I am trying to help people realize that there is hope. And I was saying it earlier today to a student who was just absolutely despondent. I once heard despair described as the idea that the fear, paralyzing fear that tomorrow will be the same as today. And a student
So
dealing with
say that again. Say that again. Say that again.
the paralyzing fear that tomorrow will be the same as today.
Okay. And that's despair. Okay.
Yeah. And this idea that what her saying to me, why keep trying if it's just going to keep coming back? If I'm just going to, even if I get better from this depression now, but the depression might reoccur, why hang in there? And I said, I cannot promise you happiness. What I can promise you is that I 100% believe that if you stick around to 70, that you're going to look back on your life and feel like it was worth it. That we're not here just to have joy. We're here to have an experience, to have interactions. And a lot of my job is to give people hope. And I can do that because I have genuinely seen people come through these times. And if they've spent 16 years walking into the woods, yeah, they're not going to walk out in an hour a week, just stopping by my office. But I can give them some of the tools to feel like we can do this. And we do know that particularly for anxiety, particularly for depression, we have a lot of experience that talking to people, the combination of counseling and medication gets most people to feel they can be functional and be in a space where, yeah, life feels worth it.
What's it? Thank you. Beautifully said. I would expect nonetheless, but I get the sense that when folks are in the midst of, let's call it an episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
A moment of deep depression, a moment of severe anxiety. Personally, I've lived there. I live there, still, but like, it kind of seems like we get the blockers on and you can't get outside of that. I once heard somebody describe depression as like you're inside a sauna, you are overheated. All you need to do is get up and open the door, but you literally physiologically can't stand up and open the door. So it's got to be so hard as the therapist, as the counselor, as the expert to be sitting there and like, what they're seeing in a sense of like, they're blinded. They're just looking like everything sucks. Why even go on? And you're saying, but there's hope. Just stick around another day. There's hope. How do you get somebody out of that acute mindset? Like, I know you talked about there's therapy and there's medication. Like, are there triggers that occur that help people get out of these acute episodes? Is it just time? Is it when they're ready? Is it when their brain is ready and the chemicals wear off or wear out? Like, how do people find themselves out of these acute episodes?
Well, and again, there's two different levels of acute that you can be talking about. So let's say I had someone earlier today, and he was in this space where he couldn't listen to logic, he couldn't hear anything,
Hmm.
hyperventilating, doing whatever. So step one in a situation like that is to just, when we are really tired, when we're under the influence of alcohol, when we're really aroused, when we're enraged, we are not using the same brain that you and I are using right now.
Good
So
call.
step
Yep.
one for me is to say, okay, how can I help this person with something we call grounding? So, really, the most popular form of therapy right now, or that's being taught in schools for therapists, is called DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy. And DBT is all about this idea of how can I ground and be in this present moment. So, using some of those mindfulness techniques that are, all the rage at this moment. But the purpose of that is to get out of that headspace where I'm spinning, to slow down my heart rate and to be able to
Hmm.
return back to this more logic center where I can engage with all those other things, where I know and feel that I can be safe, I can be okay. So, step one is helping people calm down. And particularly when a person's an anxiety attack or a panic attack, reminding them, you've been here before. You're okay. You know you're safe.
Shit.
And if you could just
Wow.
yeah, if you could just stop and remember that, the thing that you're most afraid of has already happened. You've survived it.
Yeah, they
That
say the
pain.
worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you.
Right. And so again, our brain is designed to try to limit our pain, our exposure to pain. And that's why suicidal ideation is actually your brain telling you, actually, there's hope. You're not always going to have to be trapped in this pain. There's a way out of it. So while we think of suicidal ideation as the worst thing that we could have, it's actually our brain trying to tell us, no, you don't always have to be in pain. Now, my job is to help insert for those people, there's a different option. Suicide isn't the only option. There's another way to not be in that pain, that level of
Mm.
discomfort. For those longer term periods, it's saying, again, I was talking to a girl just the other night, an alum, and she's just been in this pervasive depressive episode for such a long period of time. And she is willing, it's saying, okay, what can we try that's new? I'll often use the analogy of, why are your keys always the last place where you look? Well, because you stop looking once you found them. And so we're going to keep looking until we find the thing that's going to help you to get that. And so for some people in my podcast, I recently interviewed someone about psychedelic therapies. So there's new
Yeah, I was
things that
listening
we're,
to that dude. Yeah.
yeah. So there's always new things that we're trying. Again, whether that is esketamine, whether that is psilocybin, whether that is transcranial magnetic stimulation. Let's try something new and different until we find the thing that's going to help you connect back to that healthiest version of yourself so that you can see the world the way it actually is. And so frequently for people, when I ask them, I just say, well, again, I have a number of rules, and one of them is, no special rules for you, that you don't get to treat yourself any differently than you would treat anyone else. And so I'll say to them, would you tell your best friend just to give up? It's not worth it. And they'd say, oh,
Yeah.
well, no, because they're special. Well, all right, no special rules. That there's
Oh, I
so,
like that, dude. I heard somebody say, yeah, like treat yourself like you would treat someone you love. You would
mhm,
never, the negative self talk that
mhm,
I think we all have. I don't know, but it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
most people, like you got this negative self talk track, and you're like, dude, would you ever talk like that to your kids, to your
hmm,
spouse, to your friends? Like, no,
all
you
right.
never say that. Like, why do we treat ourselves this way? So I love this takeaway of like no special rules. Treat yourself the way you would treat the ones you've loved when you're having these negative thoughts or you're having an episode.
Well, and you're a science guy, so this idea of, if we know we're doing bad science if we can't replicate the results.
Hmm.
And so that's what I'll say to them. Okay, if it's only adding up, if you're the only person that the universe hates, and you don't think the universe hates any other person, what makes you so special that you're the only person that can't heal from depression? That you're the only person that's such a burden that the world would be better off without you? Okay, nope. If we can't replicate it using somebody else, that's bad science. So
Yeah.
now we need to flip that out.
Yeah, I always say evidence. Show me the evidence.
Mhm.
Show me
Right.
that. Show me the email. Show me something. Give me some physical evidence that proves.
Hmm.
And like 9 times out of 10, I tell folks, and again, I am not you, but I'm like, hey, 99% of the problems in your life are just they live in your head. They've
Hmm.
never happened, and they will never happen. We spend so much time up here thinking like, oh my God, this is gonna happen. Oh, and then this it never happens. These worries that we think about, they're just thoughts. They don't materialize. There's no evidence to support the fact that this is actually really happening. I feel like the mind is it is a double-edged sword. It
Hmm.
produces such greatness for us and scientific breakthrough and achievements and creativity and whatnot. And it could also play tricks on you to tell you to do terrible things and that you're not worthy and etc. That's really interesting, man.
Well, the other thing is, again, like, just sometimes we have to realize that what we're dealing with is a chemical issue. And I would not try to reason with insulin. if somebody
Mhm.
was hypoglycemic or hyperglycemic. I
Right,
wouldn't try to
right.
say, well, don't you think you want to absorb better? I wouldn't try to do that. I would just say, okay, where are we at with that?
Yeah,
And
totally. What the pathology, right?
so, with a person's mental health, are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you doing all the things that you need to do to take care of yourself? And then also, so sometimes it's not about reason, it's about where are we at chemically? And so
Mm.
frequently with mental health, instead of looking at it as a medical condition, we are looking at it as an issue of character and will. And we're failing to recognize that for every disorder, there's also a flip side of that coin. Bipolar disorder is often called the genius disease. And the reason it's called that is if we look back across history, so many of the people who were great figures, artists, conquerors, whichever, they may have had this bipolar disorder.
Hmm.
That every disorder comes with a superpower. Anxiety's superpower is an awareness of dangers in our environment, a way of thinking and checking through things. That some of the people who we rely on most to be our accountant, to be this person, our lawyer, they might be an anxious person, and they're the one we're relying on to spot things. That depression's superpower is empathy. That the vast majority of the most empathetic people I've ever encountered have had experiences with depression. So when we realize,
This all checks out, by the way.
yeah,
This is this
even ADHD. I have a lot of ADHD traits, and even ADHD again it can harness our creativity and our ability to jump from one thing to another. So when we instead of looking at mental health just as the disorders, the more we look at it as just something just like identity, that we are all a series of strengths and weaknesses. That when we think of gemstones, rubies are red and sapphires are blue and emeralds are green because of subtle imperfections in the crystal that make the light bend differently.
Mhm.
And if it wasn't for that, if all gemstones were clear, I don't think that would give us a better world. And similarly, if all brains were the same, if we lost everyone on the autism spectrum, if we lost everyone with Down syndrome, would our world actually be a better place? I don't think so.
Yeah,
So
super
helping to
interesting.
value ourselves in that way.
I mean, that's a not a big pill to swallow, but like that's a big revelation, right? Because I would assume that when you see folks, sometimes you see them at their best, sometimes you
Hmm.
see them at the worst, and sometimes they're just having a day, a
Hmm.
regular day. And no matter where they're at on that spectrum of reaction or moment, it's like, I think there's this core message here, Dan, that I'm hearing, which is like, hope and optimism combined with strategy, therapy, and or medication, kind of like wrapped in the wrapping paper of like, you're worthy and you're
Hmm.
special and you have something to offer. And
Hmm.
I feel that like maybe dependent on where people are at on their spectrum of having an episode, they might be more open to that messaging, right?
Hmm.
Versus not. But I think that like that's a core message I'm kind of hearing here, is that no matter where you are, what you're going through, what your diagnosis is or your therapeutic kind of program is, like, we're all worthy of love, of goodness, of acceptance. We're all capable of great things. It's just about doing the work, finding the thing that will get us to where we need to go.
Yeah.
I have a
And
question.
go ahead.
So, go ahead, dude.
Well, no, that's I was just going to say where that also intersects is kind of with animals. And what I've been doing more now is this that you know, sometimes words aren't going to get it across. But when we are just in the presence, and I don't know if you're a dog person, a cat person, anything, but sometimes just being, and for so many people, just being in the presence of their animal,
Mm-hmm.
they can just now they feel different. And Patrick, who Paws for Patrick is named for, I was his social worker, and he would come down to my office very dysregulated. He couldn't even speak, and all he would want to do is go home and be with his dog Cece. And I would ask him questions. He would nod yes or no, but therapy really was not his jam. It was just not something that he felt like he was get much from. And but if he could go home and be with Cece, he could be calm. He could regulate his heart rate by stroking her. The research shows that if just staring in the eyes of a dog, we start to develop some oxytocin production, which again, that pleasure and connection hormone.
Mm-hmm.
So the science is there that just being with animals can help us to feel better. And so that was the thing for him. Unfortunately for Patrick, the first day of his senior year of high school, Cece, who was only 6 years old, she died suddenly. And he never really recovered from that. He was someone who had dealt with depression, had dealt with the anxiety. So in May of 2020, we were out of school since March, and I hadn't had a chance to see him, but he ended up dying by suicide on a really bad day. And he had been having a great experience during COVID. Actually, he and his family had been bonding. They'd made an animal Olympics and had done, so people want to blame it on the pandemic, but no, it was just a bad day. And that's again why the name of my podcast is Not Allowed to Die, because that's my only rule. If we can just get through those bad days, often suicidal ideation is like a fever. Most fevers, we've all had fevers, and the vast majority of fevers are not deadly. but they can get to a point where they can be. And if we can just get a little intervention right at that time, we might be able to avoid it. Regardless, for Patrick, we weren't able to do that. And so his family, they came together, they got, GoFundMe was started, and they
Mhm.
said, we don't really need this money, but we want to do something that would honor Patrick's legacy and connect. And it has to be something with mental health and animals. And so that's what the organization is about. And so now we try to connect young people who have emotional health issues with emotional support animals. And so we can provide up to $500 for people to acquire an animal and up to $500 for training, like basic training of an
Mhm.
ESA, so that they can get that. So sorry to jump ahead to that, but I just wanted to
No, this
share
is
at least what we're
exactly
talking
where we
about.
need to be, brother. So
Mhm.
ESA, emotional support animal?
Mhm. So an emotional support animal is that there's a lot of different animals on the spectrum of in therapy and helping people. So the one that requires the least training is an emotional support animal, which is just an animal that when you are in the presence of it, if you have a mental health disorder, your symptoms you have decreased frequency, intensity, and or duration of your symptoms. So it could be a tarantula, it could be a fish, it could be a bunny, it could be a bird, anything that just being around it makes you feel better. And so those are only legally they're about your dwelling and in being in your home.
Mhm.
So people will often say, well, can I bring my ESA here, there, or everywhere? Well, legally, no. The only animals that are allowed to be out legally everywhere are service animals. And we think of those as like, seeing eye dogs. And there are
Right.
psychiatric service animals. But
There's
those animals,
diabetic dogs.
there's
Well, not
diabetic dogs,
dogs that
right?
are diabetic. What I meant are dogs that folks with diabetes use to I believe they can kind of observe and sense like high or low blood sugar.
Right, or for seizures or things like that.
Yeah,
So
totally.
those are animals that are trained for a specific disorder and that they are trained to have a reaction when they notice symptoms of that disorder to help remediate it.
Yeah.
And in the middle are what we call therapy or facility animals. So typically dogs, which have a higher level of training to be non-reactive. And so when you see therapy dogs that are brought around to schools, hospitals, other places where they are just being able to be pet by everyone and they are just trained to be not too like stimulated by things.
Mhm.
And so at Paws for Patrick, we also have a team of therapy dog handlers that comes around, but that's only in the Chicago area, whereas we're kind of a national organization for other things. So facility dogs are ones that might be at a hospital or at a school full time, and they're just there to help anybody who's there.
And also I know we talked, I checked the website. Folks that are listening, folks that are watching, go ahead and visit the website pawsforpatrick.org, I believe.
That's correct.
Pawsforpatrick.org. You can make a tax deductible donation. They're a 501c3, so you'll get a tax write off there. You'll be helping people, children, and folks that need emotional support animals. And if you're in the Chicagoland area, and I know a lot of you listening are, they have their gala coming up next month, which will be April 2024. It is, where'd you say it was? A downtown? No, it's
It's
up
in
north
Highwood.
in the Highwood, up north in the suburbs. But a great gala for a great cause. Tickets are very affordable. So if you're a gala person, you want to make a difference, you want to go see some good music, please consider supporting Paws for Patrick, a great organization doing like really, really great work. I feel that like somebody once told me earlier in my career that people want to help. You just have to tell them how.
Hmm.
Right. That's why like I'm really big on asking people like, hey, how can I help you? What are 3 things you need help with right now? One way that if you want to help, if you've been impacted by mental health, if you're dealing with mental health issues, if you want to help see children succeed with these emotional support animals, please, Daniel's the real deal, man. He's not blowing smoke. Go visit pawsforpatrick.org. They make a donation. Check them out. I think they're doing really, really great work, man. I think it goes back to this thing, man, about your purpose, your passion, and your value is very clear. I love watching my friends win. You're clearly winning in life when you can do these things and really have a big impact on children. You've also been at the same school for 16 years
Hmm.
as a social worker. And so I think what's interesting there is in that time, in that span, you probably observe cycles. One, you probably see a lot of kids through the families, right?
Hmm.
But like when you think back to when you started to where we're at now in 2024, what are some of the major shifts you've seen in your role, in what you do in your role, or the challenges that you're working with in public education?
I think the biggest change has been going from just direct service to the kids to being more of an ambassador for kids. I spend a lot of my work, particularly at my school, working with the LGBTQIA kids. And there has been such a shift, particularly since the pandemic, of students recognizing that they identify as something other than the gender binary. And my work in helping adults understand whether it's mental health or kids who are just again on that spectrum of gender and sexuality, that things are not the way they, and that's just even in the course of my career and the career at this school. We went from a place where we didn't have an LGBTQ group the first 5 years I was here, and we, at one point we had no kids who were out as self-identifying as on the queer spectrum, to the
Wow.
point where now I like there were more kids than I could count who were somewhere on the gender non-binary spectrum. And so helping again well-meaning adults, as you, to your point, who they want to be there, but they feel like this is a landscape that they're unfamiliar with. I guess in addition, all of the parents and people who are around our age, everyone who grew up before 2008, looking back on their own childhood and the impact of smartphones and social
Mm-hmm.
media, that it's
100%.
it's different being a kid today. The main things are still the main things. Everyone just wants to be loved and accepted and have friendships and crushes and things like that. But the amount people say all the time, why is there more anxiety now than there was when we were growing up? And I think it's twofold. One is the increased amount of comparison. They say comparison is the thief of joy. And when social media never gives you a break from comparison, and this feeling that you are always failing to have the cool enough outfit, to go on the cool enough vacation, to do all of these things. And so for teens, they're really clued into that. But the other thing we don't think about as much is that we are victims of our own success, in that what we want to give all of our children is options. But when you have options, you have the fear that you can choose wrong. And so now kids have more choices than they've ever had. And you would say, well, shouldn't that make them happy? But then, again, it's paralysis by analysis.
It's
There's
the
too many
paradox of
options.
choice. The
Hmm.
paradox of choice, I've heard it say. Yeah, more choices equal you'll be less happy with your final choice.
Right. And that's so. What else will we expect with all of these choices? How am I going to choose? How are they going to feel like they're a success? They want to go to a quote unquote good school. Well, what does that even mean? So unless we define success, so a lot of my work is helping them to define success as something tangible and realistic that they feel like they can achieve, because otherwise they just feel like they're failing to measure up.
Interesting, man. What's your again? And I want to jump in at some point. Let's just do it now. Okay, we've talked about medications and therapies.
Hmm.
We've talked about being an advocate, right? Like I don't think, again, for folks that are listening to this, if you live in a world where this is not something you're aware of or you think about or you deal with, like I hope this is a good intro for you. I think Dan, I think you're laying it out perfectly. My question, let me start here. It sounds like this is not a silver bullet thing, right?
Hmm.
It's not take this pill and you're good. It's
Hmm.
not come to therapy and you're great. It's not do these little things and you're okay. It's all of it. And as you talked about, part of it is also, okay. So when my mom got cancer, she went to this place called the Cancer Wellness Center. And the Cancer Wellness Center, it's up north in the suburbs and it's free for anybody that in any way is impacted by cancer. So some people go in, they're like, oh my God, I just got diagnosed with cancer. What the fuck do I do? I don't know. They're like, come on in and we have therapy and counseling and Pilates and we'll teach you
Hmm.
how to cook, for chemo and all of this shit. But then they also have services for like, you could just go and be like, oh my God, my best friend in Cleveland was just diagnosed with cancer. And they're like, come on in. And what that really revealed to me is that I think maybe selfishly, I thought about that there are kind of like patients and victims, and then there's other people, right?
Hmm.
Like, and what I've learned is that when people are impacted by a thing, a disease, an accident, what have you, there are circles around them of people that are influenced and impacted, right?
Hmm.
The parents, the neighbors, the friends, the coaches, the teachers, all these people. And so I think what's really beautiful how you laid out is it's all of that. And I'm curious for your take on when we look at some of these more modern or more breaking developments. Like again, the guy you had started talking about like psychedelics, right? And
Hmm.
like therapies that we would have never thought to go, like even like
Hmm.
5-10 years ago, nobody talked about that. But
Hmm.
now we're like, hey, micro dosing of these chemicals, these psychedelic chemicals can actually be really beneficial, right?
Hmm.
So how do you as a professional working at a school, and again I know you see folks on the side, outside as a private practice, but how do you as a professional take these new things, like do you need to vet them? Are they like FDA board approved? Like what is it like until you're like, hey, maybe we should try this thing? How do you go about testing new things with people?
Well, and so again, a lot of times it is reaching out to other people that I know in networks and finding out either what the research is or what their anecdotal experience with these things are. So a lot of times, one of the advantages of working at a school is that so many different, kids will share what they have done, what they have experienced, and so I'll just get to hear about it one way or the other, the good and the bad. And then following up. And I'm a podcast addict. I subscribe to literally 100 podcasts. I listen
Woo!
to them in 2.5 times speed. So when I listen back to this at some point, I listen to it fast. But so yeah, keeping up with the research on things and finding out what is the state of play. And then saying what else. A lot of times it's relatively easy because with some people we might say, well, what do we have to lose? What else have we tried? And if you're saying, gosh, I'd rather be dead, then maybe it's
Anything's
worth trying
better.
something that's new
Yeah,
and different. I had
interesting.
a client who, or actually a former student, and they've just been really desperate and going again through that pervasive depressive disorder. They're a trauma survivor, and they've recently shared that trauma that they spent over 20 years holding inside, and they went and they tried ketamine, and guess what? For them, it didn't work. It made them feel sick. Okay, but at least they tried it. So we always have to do the cost benefit analysis of what's the danger of trying something new versus the danger of staying where we're at. And again, for a lot of people with mental health challenges, it's like a person being caught on a ledge where they're afraid to they'll climb down and they can't climb up, so they're just stuck. And so sometimes
Mm.
movement of any sort, I'll often say one of three things will happen: we'll get better, we'll get worse, or we'll stay where we're at. But staying where we're at is often the worst thing that we can do. Even if we get worse, we might be able to get some movement. So by let's try something that's different.
Interesting. And I love the way you think about that. It makes me think of this author, Tim Ferriss, one has
Hmm.
this great exercise where he talks about we're often paralyzed by choice. And when we're faced with an opportunity where we can take an action,
Hmm.
we often think the action is the most risky thing.
Hmm.
But if you actually, like you said, kind of cost benefit analysis, you say, okay, what is the worst possible scenario that happens? Like go down the rabbit hole
Hmm.
of like what happens bad if I do this versus what are the positive things that can happen and how likely is it that the negative will happen? It's like
Hmm.
9 times out of 10, it's like it's a lot more likely the positive outcome will occur,
Hmm.
but you don't know unless you try. Um, you mentioned ketamine. It's very interesting. I was just recently, as I said, in Arizona. I met up with a college friend of mine and a family member separately. The buddy of mine, he's actually going to be on the podcast. He is a lawyer and he now is doing a lot of legal work on psychedelic research in the state of Arizona for mental health benefit.
Hmm.
And in like the ketamine therapies. And both these dudes they've tried and they do ketamine therapy, both
Hmm.
of them in Arizona. I never met anybody that have done it. They both had great success with it. Um, when these new things come out, and again, as you said, it's about researching, doing your due diligence as a
Hmm.
professional, talking with your network. What's your advice? And I know it's kind of like a general question, but like when we want to try new things, is it like you try it once, you're like, sorry, like, is there a general rule of like, we need to try something a month, 2 months? Like, is there a general rule of how much time it takes? Again, this might go back to that concept of like mental health is not a sprint. There is no finish line. It is it is much like a true disease, and that you will this is something you deal with every day, and there's
Hmm.
peaks and valleys. So when you're trying something new with your patients and with your students, is there a rule of thumb as to like how long you want to try something before moving on to something else?
Well, again, I think that would go back. What's the experience of others who've tried this thing and how long it takes to see benefit? So, with like the traditional medications that we're using, antidepressant medications, the rule of thumb is that it typically takes at least 3 weeks to see any kind of change and shift from that.
Okay, okay.
So, and very frequently, the first week or so, people will have a bunch of negative side effects like stomach discomfort, headaches, things like that. And so, we might say, don't quit after the first week, even if you're having some negative side effects. Let's hang on to it for about 2 to 3 weeks. And that's typically psychiatrists will make it the first follow up appointment in a month to see where we're at from there.
Okay.
And if we haven't seen any change in that month, then we might say, okay, we need to either increase the dosage, decrease, or shift to something new and different. With things like ketamine, though, the research says that we should be seeing an impact a lot of times within 2 or 3 treatments. And as long as the question is the body tolerating it? So if we're having a negative reaction, if we're having like physical, like things where we just can't keep taking it, well, then, okay, obviously we have to stop. with things also like psilocybin or whatnot, we might see more immediate reaction where we're not going to have to stick with 6 months of taking psilocybin to see if we're having any impact. It might be one treatment of it will have a dramatic impact or change. I was actually recommending to a sophomore student today the idea of perhaps trying acupuncture, because for certain people, acupuncture might be the case. So is it just, I said to her, if you find after one experience of it, it was just not your jam, you just really didn't like it, okay, you can stop. But what's, again, that cost benefit analysis? What are the potential other side effects? So
Mm.
things with a low side effect profile, we might give it a little bit more rope and a little bit longer. It also depends on how desperate are we feeling. Do we need change immediately, or we're going to die, or are we just a little bit dissatisfied with our lives? So we might stick with the yoga, we might stick with this other thing a little bit longer if we have that window. So how desperate is our circumstance? What's the side effect profile? And what does the research say about other people who've gone through this, how long it's taken them to see an effect?
Interesting. It's funny because like I think like just as like a guy,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of what I would do. I'd talk to some people. Hey, you did this.
Yeah.
What'd you think? How did it
Mm-hmm.
work for you? And then you talk to 10 people, you get maybe like an 80%,
Mm-hmm.
approval rating. You're like, okay, this seems like something safe and willing to do. Kind of depending on who you're asking, right? There's an interesting thing I want to ask you. You don't have to answer and we can cut it out if we don't
Sure.
want to talk about it. I know, we live in an area in a neighborhood in Chicago, lots of first responders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, a few of them over the years have passed, from suicide because the stress of that job, the impact, the horrors that they see, the just injustice, the things that these people see and have to deal with. And then they try to come home and coach the T-ball team
Mm-hmm.
and have a tea party with their daughter. Like these things just somehow become so unmanageable for them that they result in suicide. You see a lot of really heavy shit, man.
Mm-hmm.
Do you personally have techniques, practices, rules that allow you to kind of function in all these different domains of your life, as a spouse, as a parent, as a friend, as a coach? You've got a lot of hats that you wear, and I kind of get the sense that like the stuff that you see is very similar to what a police officer could see. They could have that impact. So again, the question's like for somebody like you, or again, somebody listening that's in a position where they're seeing injustice and really rough things. What are some things that you do in your life to try to manage your own life so that you can be effective in the other kind of areas and roles in your life?
Well, I'm actually, as I said, each disorder can be a bit of a superpower. And my ADHD traits, the nice thing benefit for me is when one person leaves my office, like it's gone and I'm on to the next thing that's in front of me. And so again, for me, and my day is balanced out. Again, another great thing about working in a school, like if I worked in a treatment center where all I was seeing were trauma survivors or victims or eating disorder issues, it might start to wear down on me. But I get to deal with that, and then I also get to deal with the drama of the homecoming date that didn't go well, or so it's again a lot of variety, and I think that
Yeah.
variety helps to keep it manageable. In addition, it's for me, it's what are those self-care things? Every day I do meditation in the morning, and just like a 10-minute, I use the app Atom, ATOM, and
Okay.
it's just a guided meditation that helps me through my day. Walking my dog, spending time with that, playing lacrosse, exercising, doing those things, and just talking to friends and venting out. One of the best bits of advice I got in grad school is when in doubt, consult. If you're afraid to consult, you're probably doing something wrong. And so I've got a great network of other professionals that I
Hmm.
work with. And so when things are getting heavy, sharing that. We don't have to do this ever on our own. So sharing that load a little bit. And I think that the challenge for so many first responders, or one my really good friend who's an ER doc, they are expected to finish their shift and just eat it and move on and shift and change, as opposed to allowing themselves to process that with support of other people who know what they're going through and can be there for them. So I'm so lucky, and especially again, as opposed to just being a therapist in private practice, working in a school, I'm always working in a team and communicating that. So I'm never dealing, like, no kid is just my responsibility alone. And so that really helps to feel like, okay, this isn't just it's not just only you that's on this. And even when I have, unfortunately, again, with Patrick, and I've had other students throughout the course of my career who've died by suicide. And that's really, when you're a therapist or a school social worker, that's the worst nightmare. But realizing that when I want to take responsibility and ownership for that, what I'm doing is that's kind of the sin of pride. And I'm taking away their agency of their life and their own decisions. That when I want to make it about me and what I should have done differently, am I going to take credit for every person I've ever worked with's accomplishments? well, if I'm not going to take credit for people's accomplishments, then I don't get to take ownership of people's challenges. And again, it is hard, but that's part of the framework. And I worked at a home, as I said, for abused and neglected kids. And they told us working there that 8 out of 10 of the boys we worked with were going to impregnate someone and or end up in jail before they were 18. And so we said, okay, well, then we got to know. I don't get Superman's cape with this job. All I can do
Interesting.
is show up
Yeah.
and care. And so the more that I normalize this idea of I will fail every single day in my job, that every day, if my goal is to reduce suffering, there will always be more suffering than there is energy from me. But I would rather show up and fail in this work than do anything else. So when that's the baseline of knowing that that's what I'm going to do, okay. And so now it's time just to show up and try again tomorrow. The goal was not to eliminate suffering. The goal was to make it manageable.
I feel like there's an element of, I think people nowadays, like, I don't think it's the way you said it, but what I kind of hear is like, it's people call it like grit, resiliency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like you said it in a much more harmonious way, right? Where it's not like show up, answer the bell, live another day, but it is live another day because the work that you're doing is having impact. And again, you're going to fail every day. We're all going to fail every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's something, but it doesn't define us. I really, really enjoy the way you kind of illustrated this idea of like, I can't take responsibility for all of the accomplishments, and therefore I can't take all the responsibility for when things don't go right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You're just, you sit in this place of assistance and of support and of help, but you can't have the responsibility of all of the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
That's a trick. I think that's an awesome, thank you for that. That was a really, really awesome way to think about it, man. What are things, again, a lot of different people listen to this show, man. I mean, some people are just, they like when I have business folks on, some people are just creatives. So many different people listen to it. In 2024 right now, to the most general way that you can think about it, what should the common person be doing or thinking about as it relates to mental health? What are your recommendations? If you could write a law into law and say every person on the planet needs to do these things, what are just some good practices folks should be doing?
I think we should analogize it to our physical health in that fall in love with movement, exercise, your body, and say instead of focusing on where your body is failing you, focus on the places it can take you. I work with so many people with body dysmorphia, eating disorder issues, things like that, and they're going to fixate on their flaws. And when we fixate on our flaws, we forget. I don't know if when your first car, if you ever think about your first car, and it probably wasn't awesome. It probably had scrapes and bumps and dents and bruises. But what you thought about when you thought about your first car was the freedom that it gave you.
Yeah.
And if we can start to treat our bodies that way and say, hey, instead of thinking about how I'm not as fast as I used to be, I'm not in the shape that I used to be, where can my body still take me? And let me have a relationship with that. And with my mental health in the same way, just like I think about all my health, what is my identity as a person? Back to the whole purpose of your podcast. What is this mission, purpose, value? And realizing that my mental health is not static. It's not high or low. It's not good or bad. It's peaks and valleys. It's part of who I am. And the more that I can embrace that and realize that I am, and the way I'm built and cut and created is perfect for the mission that I have here on this planet. And if I was built any differently in any other way, I might not be able to access people, connect, and do the things that I'm meant to do. So what is my dream? What is my mission? How can I interact with that? And when things are getting in the way of that, then let me reach out and connect with people so that I can find a way to do that. That's all.
Oh my God, dude, that is beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's so true. I don't think people do that though. I think it's
No.
a hard thing because I think we are brought up, like again, like most of the attention we get is negative than positive. Like, hey, don't do this, don't do that. It's like, it's funny when you talked about the way you're made, the way you operate is good for something. I literally was thinking about like last night at lacrosse, right? It's like it became very clear. I'm like very aware that like, I'm not out there for a long time, but I'm out there for a good time. And it's like, somebody's like, man, you hustle. I'm like, yeah, I'll hustle as hard as I can and I'll come off, right? Some dudes, they're out there for 10 minutes on a shift. I'm like on, off. And like, that's maybe the benefit or the value of that I can bring in this little nook of this world. And I really also want to, like, again, for folks that are listening, I think it's important. what I'm hearing from you, Daniel, God, it feels weird calling you Daniel. What I hear from you though is one, have a level of awareness, right? Like, be aware and take time to notice, like, how do you operate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you having a lot of negative self-talk? Or do you focus on the negatives of your body and the way that your brain works? Like, be aware of where are you excelling, what are you good at, and what are you able to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing is, like, once you become aware of that, do that. Do
Mm-hmm.
that thing, provide that value. I think I once heard somebody say the best way, it was like the best way to grow or the best way to bring value is to be of service to other people. You
Mm-hmm.
know, helping others is the best way to help yourself. Be of service to others. And I think that, like, maybe when folks are in those moments again of the negative self-talk, the this, the that, or the other, it's like, if there's a way that they can help others, we start to see better outcomes for us. I mean, it's very clear, again, like I said at the beginning, your purpose, your passion, your value is very, very clear. I think we need more of you in the world. I know there's a lot of yous out there, but I think one kind of call to action for folks listening is, like, if you don't take time for your health, your mental health, meaning you don't just take a few minutes, even just to sit and breathe and just not be on your phone in the morning or at night. If you've never been to a therapist, like, a lot of employers nowadays, they'll give you a therapist. They got an 800 number. Like, try it, test it out. I will bet you're not guaranteed. I will guarantee you won't have negative outcomes. Like, take the time to start making this a priority to focus on, because I feel that when folks do that, it's like, what do they call it? It's like a 10xer, right?
Well,
It's like
yeah,
a 10xer.
again, it's stop thinking about mental health as just problems and start thinking
Yeah.
about mental health as the spectrum of all of your identity and who you are. You know, we often think about, many of us have been to a personal, like physical therapist if you've had, and it's ultimately the difference. People wonder, what is life coaching? Well, you know, the difference between life coaching and therapy is the difference between physical therapy and a personal trainer. You know, so both of this is like, so physical therapy is when we're remediating to get back to base level. You know, my knee isn't working the way it was anymore. Now I'm trying to get back to base level. Personal trainer is trying to say, hey, what are your goals? And let me help you to exercise to achieve your goals. Well, therapy can be both. Therapy can be remediating something from where, you know, I used to be able to do this. I want to be able to do this again. I don't want these symptoms to be stopping me from participating in my life. But also it can be, how can I be the healthiest version of myself? So as we always say, Tiger Woods has a golf coach. The best people in the world have somebody who's pointing out to them and seeking out. You've had people on this show who are mentors. Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be therapy, but you should also be seeking those people who can be that reflective person for you, who's helping you to become your best self. And if
Yeah.
you want to do that in a way that is totally confidential, where nobody else is getting involved in that, somebody who's trained to listen and then reflect back and say, what are your goals? Let me help you to put things and hold you accountable to your goals. Therapy, life coaching, any of that can benefit people in those ways.
Okay, so here it is, man. I just talked to a dude, a buddy of mine, very, very successful. I think in all aspects of life, I consider this guy successful, right? Great family, man, great parent, great friend, great mentor, successfully in business. And we were talking, and he's like, he's like, can I ask you something? I'm like, yeah. He said, how much do you invest each year, like, in your personal growth? And I was like money? He's like, yeah. I was like, I don't think anything. And he was like, it was literally like I told him, like, I was like a spy for Russia or something, right? He was like, what? He's like, you don't have like you don't pay a coach, or you don't pay for this or that. I'm like, no. He's like, dude. And he told me a story that, he goes to all these different, some of them are like mastermind groups and some are just mentor groups. And he goes, in one of these groups that I'm in, we went around and we said, what did we invest last year? And again, some of these are very big business dudes.
Mm-hmm.
One guy's like, dude, I spent like 125K last year on coaching, mentorship, learning, professional growth. And a guy spends this much and he spends this much. And he's like, dude, I need you to spend money on yourself this year to grow in any way you can. Personal trainer, therapist, mastermind, life coach. If you invest in yourself, he goes, you will always see the return. Always. And he goes, and I know it sucks because you're thinking about the money. And now if I spend that much on me, I don't have this much. He goes, I guarantee you will see the results. And I think that that's what people should be doing. Start investing in yourself. Start thinking about the way you framed it out as like, therapy for maintenance, therapy for like, acute issues you're facing right now, and therapy for growth. I think this is a big thing we should all start to invest in time and money, and or either or both, to start to see betterness start to grow. And I think as one person gets better, that circle, like we talked, around them, their spouses, their friends, their kids, their families, everybody gets better when we're better. As we start to close out here, man, one, I want to thank you. We've known each other again almost like 30 some odd years. Your reputation precedes you. Your knowledge, your skills as a professional, as a friend precede you. You are a rad human being, Daniel Maigler. I want people to go check out your podcast. So tell them what it is and where they can find it.
So Not Allowed to Die is a mental health podcast where a lot of times it's just me talking about dilemmas that I'm seeing in my practice. So whether I'm talking to individuals or, things that I'm seeing that are popping up, themes that I'm seeing when I'm talking to my clients. Also, I may have guests on which talk about things like different kinds of therapies and modalities. And I talk about the ways people can approach, whether talking to your psychiatrist or bringing up when your therapist has hurt your feelings. So they can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever they listen to podcasts, or YouTube when I have guests on, and I post that on YouTube. So that's Not Allowed to Die. And
Awesome.
then the Pause for Patrick through the website, pawsforpatrick.org. So anybody, if you have a young person in your life, and we consider young people 26 and younger, or if you're like a parent of a young person, if you're raising kids and you have any kind of mental health disorder and you think you could benefit from an emotional support animal, go to the Pause for Patrick website and we can hook you up. And even if you just need a letter so that you can have an animal in your dwelling and not have to pay pet fees, we can hook you up with a free letter and someone to do that for you. So check out Pause for Patrick for that.
Awesome, man. Folks, please check that out. Thank you so much, buddy. This was so overdue, and I'm feeling warm and fuzzy and good and invigorated and ready to go. So thank you for making the time for this. It really means a lot.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I'm a fan, and so now I get to to hang out this way too.
Awesome, brother. All right, I'll see you on Thursday. Thank you so much, bud.